What is the difference between this
All right, I just want to go on record. We should all be wearing masks.
and this?
Solo para que quede constancia, deberíamos ponernos las máscaras.
Well, in the initial version, the sentence, though seemingly straightforward, unfolds with layers of depth. It means several things at once. Walter White doesn't really care that they're not wearing masks. In contrast, Walter Blanco is the guy who asks the person next to him to pull up their mask on the bus.
Insisto en que deberíamos ponernos una máscara.
The first one has many intentions. The second one is a dialogue that I think not even the actor himself understands why he's saying it. He just says it because it's written in the script, I suppose. So today, I like to explore the nuances of filmmaking, particularly how subtle changes in direction, editing, and acting can distinguish between a masterpiece scene and one that falls short of greatness, all while using the exact same script. The scene in question is particularly hard to watch because Metastasis appears to miss its subtleties. It's a pivotal moment in Breaking Bad that leaves a trail of unanswered questions, such as the motive behind Gus's decision to eliminate Victor. But to simplify our discussion, let's break it down step by step. The scene unfolds in the first episode of the 4th season, titled Boxcutter. This happens after Walter manages to avoid being executed by Mike.
Jesse, do it now! Do it, bitch! Do it!
By asking Jesse to kill Gale. Consequently, Gus loses his potential head cook.
Your boss is gonna need me.
Victor, frustrated for failing to prevent Jesse from killing Gale, faces the additional rebuke from Mike for being seen at the crime scene.
It all happened.
As a result, Victor enters the scene with his status significantly diminished, and that's what the scene is largely about: status and authority.
So, I make it 10 to 9, which means...
Shut up.
After waiting for Gus to show up, Walter remarks on the valuable time they're losing for cooking. This prompts Victor to take matters into his own hands and seize the initiative, and when he says this,
That's right, genius. Watch me.
obviously he's trying to rectify the situation and gain some points in his favor after having lost so many. Anyway, the scene opens with Victor cooking, Mike displaying indifference, Jesse still processing the fact that he cold-bloodedly killed a good guy, and Walter looking suspiciously at Victor. And I don't think it's so much because he threatens to take his position. It's more an ego issue, because there's another kid playing with his toy. Faced with this, his first reaction is the one we saw at the beginning of the video.
All right, I just want to go on record. We should all be wearing masks.
Now let's compare this with this.
Solo para que quede constancia, deberíamos ponernos las máscaras.
Well, I know it might seem silly, but in these 13 seconds lies everything needed to distinguish between these two series. It's a moment where the subtleties are fundamental, because they carry the scene's intention. But to make myself clear, let me show you a bit more.
Should be wearing masks.
Both Walters insist on the same idea again.
Insisto en que deberíamos ponernos una máscara.
Firstly, there's a notable acting concern. When Walter White utters this line,
All right, I just want to go on record. We should all be wearing masks.
it's quite absurd to think it's because he genuinely cares about not wearing masks, especially when he believes he's about to be killed. The dialogue and the way it's expressed are very clever because it lets us know he's trying to normalize an extraordinary situation, downplaying what happened and what he did, something he often does in the series and did seconds
So-
before.
I make it 10 to 9, which means...
Shut up.
Which means we need to start a cook in the next 10 minutes to keep to our schedule.
And it's also a way to assert dominance with a slightly arrogant and paternalistic tone, which he also often does. Basically, the message is to follow his orders, that he's the one who knows. It's a way of trying to regain power, and even the way he says it plays into this, the arrogant manner, and how he drags the words.
All right, I just want to go on record. We should all be wearing masks.
He only needs a glass of wine and a robe to be at home telling his kids to clean the table. On the other hand, when we hear from Walter Blanco, all I see is
Solo para que quede constancia, deberíamos ponernos las máscaras.
a guy genuinely concerned that we wear masks. There are no further implications or subtext. It's just that. But let's continue.
Wearing masks.
Faced with this, Victor keeps working. Mike stands up as a direct way to downplay what Walter says. It's a way of dismissing it, showing that he's ignoring it, which gains more strength because he's about to serve himself coffee from none other than the machine Dale made, as a kind of reminder of the murder they are about to be judged for. In Metastasis, the reaction of Mike, whose name is Miguel in this case, is as follows.
Solo para que quede constancia, Deberíamos ponernos las máscaras.
Yep, just that. The fact that Mike stands up just as Walter speaks and serves himself coffee from Gail's machine is significant. However, Miguel staring at Walter while chewing gum doesn't carry the same narrative weight. And what also happens is that when Mike stands up, Walter sees him leave. In this case, Bryan Cranston has an opportunity to react because he may feel affected by the fact that Mike explicitly ignores him. It's a tool for the actor, a stimulus which he can turn into a reaction, enabling him to make an arrogant gesture, seek refuge in Jesse by looking at him, and then finish with that shake of his head. There's an intention in Walter, one in Mike, and even a lack of intention in Jesse to ignore him. Walter and Jesse coexist in the frame, and we understand that Jesse remains in a state of shock after having taken Gail's life. In the Metastasis, we cut to a shot of Victor that isn't very relevant.
Insisto en que deberíamos ponernos una máscara.
Walter Blanco insists on the face mask again, and then the camera pans to Jose, the Colombian version of Jesse. But we don't have the most important thing, Walter's gaze at Jose, that search for complicity. Plus, the actor doesn't have the opportunity to react to anything because he doesn't have a stimulus like Walter White does from Mike. Basically, he's acting alone. But let's continue again. What's interesting is that Walter tries the same thing again, but with a different approach.
Bet he forgets the aluminum. Guaranteed. Guaranteed he forgets.
He spends a few seconds once again commenting arrogantly about Victor, and especially trying to establish some connection with Jesse. Once again, with just these dialogues, he seeks to normalize the situation, connect with Jesse, feed his ego, and regain some power, some status. And facing this, the joke is that he doesn't regain absolutely anything.
You forgot the aluminum. One of the first steps in...
In Metastasis, everything is much more explicit, and the big difference is that Walter shares a look with Jose.
¿Qué está haciendo este pedazo imbécil? Estoy seguro de que se le va a olvidar el aluminio.
And this look is significant because there's a deliberate choice for it to be present, although I'm not entirely sure why. In contrast, in Breaking Bad, there's a very conscious decision for it not to be there, for it not to exist, because under no circumstances should Jesse look at Walter or react to such trivial comments. This sheds light on what's going on in his head regarding his feelings about what he did and how he feels about Walter. As the sequence unfolds, Gus enters the scene. Needless to say, Gus Fring's entrance is much more imposing than Gustavo's in the Metastasis version. When Gus enters, there's an uninterrupted crane movement that lets him in an imposing close-up shot with areas of chiaroscuro and reds provided by his attire. Obviously, this crane movement alone costs a few $1,000s, but the point is that he appears as a very threatening figure. Gustavo, on the other hand, the Colombian version, barely appears for a few seconds in the background. His entrance is less intimidating, but let's delve a bit more into Gus's. And now, with Gustavo's. If Gus ends up in a close-up shot emphasized by a camera movement towards him, Gustavo is framed with much more light levels, and the composition leaves him without any distinction, with elements that even interrupt his figure diminishing his presence. Additionally, in Breaking Bad, they leave the moment without music, so that the only sound present in the sound design is his footsteps, literally, his presence. Something that in Metastasis is overshadowed because this moment is accompanied by incessant music that drowns out the sound of Gustavo's steps. It wouldn't be so bad if it were a specific decision, but the problem is that music is constantly used to score the scenes instead of playing with sound. Because, well, generating emotions with music is always easier. Anyway, something interesting also happens with the looks and the timing. While in Breaking Bad, they leave the shot of Gus without cutting it, creating a dense entrance that makes the shot feel eternal and compels you to look away. In Metastasis, they cut it instantly. If Gustavo's shot lasts 4 seconds, Gus's lasts twice as long. In Breaking Bad, when we cut we see Mike, Jesse, and Walter seen from above as a block, and this concept of a block is important for what happens next. Walter, for the first time, is deflated and abandoning the role of the arrogant father. Jesse, for the first time, reacting to some stimulus from the scene, and Mike, well, Mike is still Mike. Next, we see a closer shot of Walter, during which he lowers his gaze, a contrast to Gus, who in the subsequent shot maintains his gaze, asserting his higher status. Then, Gus looks at Victor, a significant moment as Victor responds with a childlike smile, seeking approval like a student asking for an A+ from the teacher. And, to conclude, the bastard gazes at Walter, seemingly taunting him with what lies ahead. All this editing game is important and is what differentiates this from this. While Victor maintains a poker face as he looks at Gustavo, Jose's reaction remains empty, much like when he reacts to something as trivial as Walter talking about aluminum. We don't even know who the hell Gustavo is looking at because there's no montage construction of it, and for some reason, this Walter has the guts and can hold Gustavo's gaze until the commercial break. The exchange of glances feels cliched, lacking subtlety and depth. Anyway, both Gustavos descend the stairs. The one from Breaking Bad moves much slower, adding more tension to his passage until they are all downstairs together. Perhaps the main difference at this moment is that in Breaking Bad, Victor and Gus are visually connected because they share the same frame until Gus leaves it, leaving us with another glance from Victor. He is visually present in the scene constantly, whereas in Metastasis, it's only Gustavo. Victor's presence is non-existent. The issue is that, like much of the series, only what matters at that moment is shown. I'm not sure if I'm explaining myself well, but if Gustavo enters the conversation, then we only see Gustavo because he is the one taking action. But we don't see Gustavo in relation to Victor. Once again, the crux of the matter lies in distinguishing between illustrative language, which merely depicts, and cinematic language, which establishes connections. And this is something that repeats throughout the scene, but to continue mentioning it would be redundant.
All right, let's talk about Gail Bedecker. He was a good man and a good chemist, and I cared about him.
From this point onward, what happens is Walter trying to convince Gus that Victor can't cook.
Certainly not him. This person doesn't know what the hell he's doing.
And Metastasis doesn't do it poorly.
Este tipo no tiene ni idea de lo que está haciendo.
It's a moment that is executed quite well, with the acting, direction, and editing factors working correctly. However, in my opinion, what's highly critique-worthy is the boxcutter moment. In Breaking Bad, it goes like this.
Let us work. We're ready to go to work. We'll just pick up right where we left off.
And in Metastases, it's like this.
Gustavo, por favor.
If Gus practically interrupts Walter White, Gustavo lets him finish, and the moment itself is quite different. First, Gus abruptly attacks Victor, catching everyone off guard in a more erratic and surprising manner. In a single shot, we witness the varied reactions of Mike, Walter, and Jesse, each responding differently. Mike disavows his boss, instinctively raising the gun as he perceives it as a threat. Walter is visibly frightened, fearing for his life, while Jesse exhibits more than fear: anger. In any case, all three are depicted as a unified group that fails to comprehend the situation. On the other hand, we witness shots of Gus killing Victor. And beyond the action itself, what's important is that Gus doesn't stop looking at Walter while doing it. And once again, Walter is terrified, Jesse is angry, and Mike is surprised, wondering why the hell he didn't retire. It's interesting because even though they're in the same boat of not understanding, all the characters have a different reaction that nuances them and tells us about them. In Metastasis, the reactions are more generic. They're almost the same. Any reaction from any character would be valid for another. And Gustavo doesn't look at Walter or Jose. He doesn't do it when he's slitting Victor's throat, and he doesn't do it at any moment. Notice the significance Breaking Bad places on the glances, where even in Victor's final moments he looks at Walter, attributing the weight of his demise to him. Concluding the scene, Gus directs his gaze first to the still terrified Walter, then to Jesse, whose sustained shot brims with anger in contrast to Walter's fear. The series highlights this moment as pivotal, characterized by an exchange of glances that reveals much about its characters. Mike indicates that his boss is likely reaching a level of madness he's never witnessed before. Walter, visibly frightened, perhaps because he perceives Victor's death as eerily reminiscent of his own fate, while Jesse appears more inclined towards anger, possibly due to the callousness with which Gus disregards human life, or the cold-blooded execution of a loyal associate. Regardless, the emotions of anger, fear, and surprise convey distinctly different messages. This crucial moment is absent in Metastasis, where the focus lies solely on Victor's lifeless body, prioritizing the graphic and almost gory elements of the scene over emotional depth. And there isn't even a glance from Gus, as there is in Breaking Bad, which is what leaves behind his message and the meaning of this whole moment. Cinema is an audiovisual medium, and it doesn't matter if a script is written by the same Vince Gilligan himself. This is especially true in a scene like this.
Get back to number one.
where the essence lies precisely in everything that isn't explicitly written. As someone working in the Latin American film industry, specifically in Colombia, I can say that knowing the internal process, what was achieved was a miracle. In just 6 months, the team shot 60 episodes of the series in less than a year, and with a much smaller budget. But thinking about great Latin American series, if you ask me, I believe there's a Latin American Breaking Bad that is much more representative of the industry, an Argentine series called Ocupas. Its protagonist is literally a kind of Jesse Pinkman, a middle-class young man gradually drawn into a criminal life he didn't need, but found seductive in the absence of a bigger purpose in his life. Gradually, the series depicts the protagonist's decline, consequences, and moral corruption. And he also shaves his head like a lost disciple of Mike. But don't be alarmed. The series is from the year 2000, and it marked a before and after in portraying marginality and criminality in Latin America, as well as in the way of making series. Moreover, it boasts one of the best scripts I've seen and one of my favorite moments that truly resembles Vince Gilligan's style, when he discovers that his companion, who before leaving gave him a gun and made him shave his head, was actually framing him. All of this conveyed without a single word.